Okay, welcome to today's stream. We're going to go about 30 minutes, I'm guessing. And I just wanted to give an update on my experiences using the M1 Silicon Mac Mini. There's been a few updates that have happened over the past few weeks. And mostly it's smooth sailing, but certainly I think that there's some things to at least demonstrate and help everybody understand if you're interested in learning more about this. So what we're going to be doing, I'm just pulling up the chat on my phone here. What we're going to be doing is I'll just present some things, and if you have questions, then let me know. And we will, look at those things. First and foremost, the biggest news for me was from some of the different instrument makers. I'll pull open Sounds Online real quick because they're one of the ones that I think was interesting. They had been saying that they didn't have anything compatible at all, and then this is what we're seeing as a trend right now. So they've now said that the EastWest software is compatible with Mac OS 11 Big Sur on Intel-based Macs, which they hadn't said before. And then they said that it also runs on the ARM-based Macs with Rosetta 2 installed. Please check if your DAW is ready for Big Sur and if it supports plugins that require Rosetta 2. So they didn't make an update, so this is, I think, still the same version of this instrument. It's just that they have now said, we've tested enough and it seems to be working on these. It means that if you want to run Logic, you have to do it in Rosetta mode with this instrument. And that's fine. I haven't noticed a huge, there's, I'm sure, a performance change, but it's working really well in Rosetta mode. And just for everyone who doesn't know how to do the Rosetta, if you go into your application folder where Logic is and you do Command I, you'll see that you can click on Rosetta right here, open using Rosetta. And not every instrument lets you do that. Not every application lets you do that. But Logic is one of them that can run either way. And I think that when you run it natively, you're going to get more power, but you're going to get less compatibility. And so now, if I were to come through here, make a new instrument, and let's load up the Play plugin. It loads up. I can load instruments. I've noticed that it's not very efficient with quick recall of samples in various places. And an instrument like this is going to have a hard time with that. Not a hard time, but it's going to have a lot to do either way. And that's because, you could be loading up a multi-sampled instrument that has multiple microphone placements and a lot of different layers. And if you play a note, it's going to have to recall 12, 15 different audio files. And so the biggest thing I've noticed with this is when I have my buffer size set too small, that it just doesn't work very well. And so I have to have this at least at 256, but it works best at 512. And I'm still, just because of all the stuff happening with this, I'm still almost always, once I get a track pretty much how I like it, I'm still just freezing it and unloading this because I don't need it to be using so much of the RAM type process to pull those, or going to the hard drive and finding a bunch of independent files. If you freeze it, then it's just going to read the frozen file off the hard drive and make everything else just a little bit smoother. So I would say that a lot of companies are now beginning to do that. They're beginning to finally have things tested out and either saying this is the way to use it or this isn't the way to use it. The other one that was interesting was Waves. And I've been using some of the Waves plugins now, but they haven't released an update for this. But they have finally released some things here about the M1. And ironically, here are the findings of what they found for the Silicon M1 processors. Pro Tools 2020-12, Ableton Live 10, FL Studio 2010, Studio One 5, Reason 11, Bitwig, Digital Performer, Adobe Audition. Even though they have not announced official support for M1, they've actually tested them and found that the version 12 plugins work, and as long as they're running the Rosetta 2 emulator environment. So not official support, but they're giving us the green check mark for all of those. Wave Central, the standalone thing, works, they say. And then it says Logic Pro, GarageBand, Main Stage, Final Cut Pro gets the red X, means it's not working. But I have found that almost all the plugins I'm using in Rosetta are in fact working. And there are a couple exceptions to that. For instance, I was trying to do some 7.2 surround sound demonstration for some of my students. And anytime I did that, the waves could not handle the higher number for a surround. And so it was crashing. But 5.1 surround is working fine. And the NX system for the headphone tracker is working fine. And the EQs and compression and all that stuff is working fine. So that's, I mean, it's interesting. I haven't run into too many issues. So like I said, I see a comment there in about Waves running just fine. And it's true. I would say that it is working fine, except for in a couple situations where it's not working 100%. And that was with the higher count for the multi-channel audio things. But yeah, my experience is that it's working great for all the other stuff. And then the first comment there about EastWest working all right under M1. Yeah, it is working. It's not as efficient as I'm hoping it will be once they go native for Silicon. Meaning, right now, it's the old architecture, and we're getting it to work. And even with a small amount of RAM, I'm able to load big things in there. And it seems to be smooth as long as I don't go on a too small buffer size. And as long as I have all the samples on a really fast external drive, it seems to be working really well. Okay, so those have been kind of the speed bumps for me. I really loved using it in non-Rosetta mode when I first got the computer and had everything installed. And Logic itself, if you're using all internal things in non-Rosetta mode, is working amazingly snappy. But I think now that I'm starting to integrate more of the third-party stuff, I feel like that it's still pretty snappy, and I haven't noticed a huge performance hit. But it's certainly, as soon as some of these companies finally buy in or, start getting everything more native, I think we're going to be in a better place. Let's see, some other comments. Yeah, so if you have any questions specifically, let me know. I could do a little demonstration. Here's, I hope I can do this without crashing anything. Because I am streaming at the same time, but the EastWest stuff, for instance, and this is the example I did the other day. I did a full strings, which is four different instruments, all simultaneous. So it loads pretty slow, like normal, and I think, because I've got my library split on a couple different drives, I need to transfer these over to a faster drive because I think they actually would load better, but haven't done it yet. It's like, hundreds of gigs of samples. Kind of unwieldy sometimes. But this is one of the relatively bigger instruments because it has the full orchestra split out into different paths. And so once this loads, I'll let you hear what it does when it's not happy. Okay, there we go. So you probably heard at least one note there just kind of like stop. That means it's not getting to it on the drive fast enough. There's a couple different factors happening here. One of them is I'm using an audio driver to pass audio to you. So you're not necessarily, I'm not using like the best audio driver. And so that does add a little bit of an issue in there. But even when I'm not using that, every once in a while I still hear the notes just like pop off when I'm using 256 or below on the buffer. And then once I go to a higher setting, they all work fine. There's plenty of time for it to find all the files. And then I freeze the track so it's a non-issue. But I'm hoping with the new EastWest Play instrument that they're releasing soon, they were supposed to have released it already, but got pushed back, and hopefully they're integrating more compatibility in with that they'll address some of those issues. Okay, some more comments. Good to know about the not needing to for Rosetta and Waves, but I would say I was having more issues with the NX head tracker because that uses an external piece of software. When it wasn't in Rosetta, it worked half the time, and when I switch it to Rosetta, it works all the time. I can't speak for all of the instruments. I think that's what they're saying, is that it's just not consistently working. And then Logic gets choked faster than your iMac 2018. Cool. I haven't had that experience. Do I think 8 gig is enough? So this is the big question that a lot of people don't know if 8 gig is enough. I haven't had any issues because of the way I work with it. But if you're putting in a full orchestra, lots of different instruments in there, you're going to end up freezing a lot of those tracks because of the way that the computer uses the hard drive instead of its RAM a little bit. So I think there's a lot of virtualization of the RAM, even though it's like super fast and everything's getting pulled around quicker. And the whole architecture, I think, is brilliant. Until EastWest releases an updated that's fully native for M1, 8 gigs is going to have to be a workaround because it's not designed for the new It's not designed for the new architecture that way. This is the old way of thinking, just rosetted onto the new way of thinking. So I don't even think the 16 was going to fix that in those cases. I think you're going to have to wait till they figure out a way to really change the whole way they're thinking about it. I haven't. So some people are saying that it's worse than their other computers. I was coming from one that was a little older than the 2019, and so of course it's going to be better than that no matter what. But I've been doing fairly my normal size of sessions and have never hit the ceiling on it whatsoever. And so the things that I find the snappiest are when I'm playing. Say that let's get rid of the play for now, because that's not really a fair comparison since it's the old school way of thinking. But even Alchemy or something, when I'm working with this and playing things, it's like everything is so snappy in terms of like windows popping up and recording. All the waveforms are showing up. So I think everything is super snappy for me. But that's not necessarily a M1 advantage. I mean, that's not something, if you had a really powerful computer before this, you were having good performance with all the graphics as well. But I do think that there's just some sort of, everything just feels tighter in terms of responses of what I'm doing. Even when I'm playing back a big project, or even when I'm, recording, I mean, everything just seems to be really, really tight in terms of its response, which I think is a big deal, because in the old days of Logic, for years, any of you who've used Logic for a long time, you'll remember that it's like we would record something and we wouldn't even see like the waveform or the meters updating. We would be clipping for like a second or two without even knowing it. Of course, if you were listening, you'd hear it, but it's just like visually everything was so laggy, even on tough computers like 5 years ago. And so I think that a lot of those issues are finally all behind us, I believe. And the noise thing is 100% true. I have not yet heard the fan on this computer once. I've never heard the fan on it. I mean, even when it's doing like major exports of 4K or 8K video from Final Cut or this in Logic, it never comes on. So I've never heard it. Yeah, I think that pulling stuff, using the hard drive as a RAM replacement is not exactly the same thing for sure. So it's interesting the issues that we're going to be facing. I would definitely, if I were any of you, and even if I was to go back, because I'm in a little different situation. I've got enough computing power to do everything I need all the time. Part of that's because of my job. Part of that's because, I spend a lot of money on things. But when I got the M1, it was like a holdover in a way. I wanted to test it out. I wanted to see it all, but I also wanted to spend as little as possible on it, because I wasn't sure if it was going to take over my computing or if I was going to switch over it for everything or not. And looking back, I probably would have gotten the 16 gig of RAM. It was only a couple $100 more. But honestly, I haven't run into that ceiling with it yet. I just haven't. And I don't do full orchestral scores in here. If I was doing that, I'd still have a Mac Pro that had, is maxed out on RAM or something. But I do a lot more where I add like a cello part from the orchestral banks or a violin part, and everything else would be like drums or, recorded vocals, synthesizers that I've recorded from my synth collection. So all of those things don't take a ton of power, and I've never maxed out the computer with any of the things I've asked it to do. So if you're doing big orchestral things, don't get a Silicon right now. Get something else. But if you are doing like normal pop rock, punk, metal, whatever, this will probably be enough power for you for the next couple of years. Let's see, more comments coming in. Yeah, so I mean, Dave Macra 89 on there. 200 pounds is just an insane price for adding 8 gigs of RAM. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to get the cheap. I could have probably gone with the other one, but I wanted to get the cheapest one too, because I felt the same way. But anytime I get a computer, I hate ever thinking that I'm, not getting the top one. I mean, that for me is the other part of this, because does it mean that it's going to last less or not work as well? My computer that I use for 360 VR stuff, because I do a lot of VR video and ambisonics audio, and I have to edit that in Adobe Premiere because it's one of the only video editors that really handle that well. That's on the computer down underneath here, and it has, 64 gigs of RAM or something, and a water-cooled video card, and all of this stupid stuff that, this computer it's Windows. but it was way cheaper than equivalent Mac. So, and Mac doesn't do VR stuff very well. So that's why I have a Windows computer in here. I don't do music creation on there very much because, for obvious reasons. Anyway, so I think my plan was to get the cheaper one now. And then what I'm really looking forward to is what they do with this technology in the future. Anyone who gets one of these right now is what we call an Apple beta tester. I mean, you're testing out stuff and helping figure out what works and what doesn't work. And there's a chance that stuff you need to do won't work on it. But in the end, it's like I want to get a really nice iMac or a future Mac Mini or a Mac Pro that has the M1 architecture. And then that will be the future-proof one for me. This one is just essentially kind of a holdover in some ways, which sounds horrible because it really is very powerful, and I'm using it way more than I thought I was going to be using it. And I love that I can use all the iPad apps and stuff on here too. So there's a few of my iPad apps that I'm using now that I didn't know I was going to be using here. Let's see where... Nave. I've always wanted to have Nave on my computer. And so here's the Nave iPad app that runs natively on here. I didn't have to buy it again. It just works. Looks like some of the graphics don't work because that's not what that's supposed to look like. But anyway, so this is an iPad app that I can just run in conjunction with my Logic Studio now. And I don't have to have my iPad connected. This was one of the instruments I used my iPad for because of how much I just absolutely love this instrument. It's a wavetable synth, which also has like a voice synthesis tool in there. And you can load anything you want into it. It just sounds amazing for certain sounds. And now that the M1 lets us run some of these instruments natively here without having to do anything with your iPad separately. The same with the iSem from Arturia, another iPad app that sounds really great. Some of these, like this one, I could get the desktop version for, but I've already paid for it. So why buy another version of it if I can just use it without having to buy it again? So those are kind of cool things that you can do as well. Let's see, other questions or comments. The other thing about the 8 gig versus 16, the way that first resonated with me, and the reason why I ended up just saying, okay, I'm going to go with the 8 gig version, besides the money, and the unknown and all that stuff, was because a lot of people were talking about how the new architecture, the 8 gig is really when you're just using one, power app at a time. And the 16 was more aimed at those who were using multiple apps. Like, say you had in the Adobe suite, you had Adobe Premiere open, Photoshop, After Effects. And so it's able to multitask a lot better between those. But if you're just using one at a time, some people were suggesting that just getting the 8 was enough. And honestly, I mean, audio compared to what you do with like intense video 3D rendering is so different that I really, as of yet, without having done a big orchestral thing, I mean, this computer has really held up very well. I'm just excited now that people are saying, okay, we're compatible with Rosetta 2. I'm waiting for them to say, okay, we just released our first official native M1 version of this, and then to switch Logic off of Rosetta and never go back. That's like the dream for me. That's kind of the dream, I think, for anyone who wants to be able to use this computer seriously for things. Cool. Any other questions or things that you've been thinking about? Yeah. And I don't actually, because I do all of my Adobe stuff on the Windows computer, I haven't actually had to test any of that out. I do some of the Final Cut Pro stuff in here. I still use Final Cut quite a bit. And it's been working really well for 4K footage. And it works almost okay for 8K footage. I mean, I can play it and it works, but it's still... So if I have an 8K video file that I add 3 different effects to it, I'm just going to let it sit and render, because if I try to play that real time during render like Final Cut is supposed to be able to do, it just like bogs down to nothing. So yeah, the flex that return policy. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Cool. Well, so I mean, those are really the main things that I've been thinking about, because in terms of the overall usage of this, I mean, this thing is killer. It's working so well. And I haven't really had any issues at all with it. And so I'm sure that, each of you have like your own experience with bugs that are still in here and wondering if they're ever going to be fixed or not. I'm sure that some of you that still have features that you wish would be added. I don't know. This is maybe an interesting thing to think about. I know that we're entering what would normally be the Logic update season, right? I mean, this is March, April, May, June. In the last few years, every year we've gotten our new big upgrade in that time, in one of those months. But of course, we switched up to the newest version of Logic really off cycle when the M1 came out, and they didn't really give us a ton of new features except that it was universal on silicon. So I don't know if that was a shift to their upgrade pattern, and all of a sudden we're going to be going in the fall now. If everything's kind of slowed down because of the pandemic, or if we are still expecting another big upgrade this spring with some new things. I'm assuming the new things are going to be some features, but we've done a lot with the core things with like live loops and the step sequencer. Perhaps it's time to finally get all the rest of the plugins updated with some new features. Add some like mastering tools for the master bus, or switch up the mixer a little bit, but add some new instruments. It's like I can imagine a half dozen new instruments that would be kind of cool to do. Or something really revolutionary, like finally porting a version of this for the iPad Pro or something like that. Yeah, okay, so MicDSP working on native, Slate plugins working, not using Rosetta. So there are some other things that are working. And then the other question from Dave, Macker89, if you were to load up, say, 8 tracks with EastWest instruments, what is the RAM usage like? The RAM usage, at least according to the system monitor, never really goes up that much with 8 gigs. I mean, it has kind of a fixed amount. What's happening is that it's going to virtualize all of that stuff. And so you look at your disk usage, and that's what actually pops up a ton. I have loaded, I think, 8 or 10 different EastWest plugins with hefty instruments. And they all work. I mean, it works. But I do notice that's when you start noticing some dropouts, when you're asking your drives to do too much and they can't keep up. So that's, again, the issue is almost always in this new architecture going to be drive speeds. And if you're asking to do too much. So with EastWest, instead of having one big hard drive, which is kind of, what some people have been trying to get away with for years, what you really need to do is have like 4 or 6 different really fast hard drives and split all your biggest instruments that you use all the time onto different ones. And then you may be able to, sneak by with using more of them like that. But it is possible to do it. I mean, but when you look at the system monitor, I mean, the RAM usage, there's not that much RAM in these systems. There's not like you can see that so much is happening. The virtual RAM is like off the charts. And so, but the actual like physical RAM kind of maintains an eerily similar amount. But I haven't really been watching it. And I know that there was a new update that just came out, which fixed some other non-related things for Big Sur. But we're looking at mostly like maintenance updates from them right now for that. So not a lot of new changes are going to be happening for a bit. But I think, with the yearly new operating system, the amount of information that Apple's learning right now about this new architecture, you have to imagine that anybody who's waiting for the next one are the smart ones, because that they're going to be able to really understand what worked and what didn't work as they're tracking all of our data and seeing what's happening with it. So it will get better, and I think that the next iteration, I'm glad that I'm doing this now, because I think that I'm learning a bunch about my own workflow in this new architecture, that when things get better, that we'll have learned some of the tips and tricks for making things work. But it's certainly not, hasn't been a smooth road every single day. Yeah. So when you were doing your projects in Pro Tools using the EastWest instruments, easily using 8+ gigs. But keep in mind that this whole thing isn't using memory the same way as it was. I mean, that's the whole point. It's like the RAM here is more of like a highway rather than a storage facility. And so the goal is that they want to sift things through there a lot quicker. And so it's not like you're keeping all your stuff in the RAM. If that was the case, you would want as much RAM as you can have. But this is really just like a pipeline in this new thing. And I do think that the freezing of tracks is going to be still, for the 8 and the 16 gig version, for big libraries, a huge deal. They just fixed that like a year and a half ago. I think it was not too long ago that they fixed the freezing of the tracks. Freezing tracks used to be that it would write the stuff to the track as an audio file, and you could unfreeze it and freeze it. But that instruments that were on frozen tracks maintained all of their files in the memory still. They never unloaded the actual instruments. And so it just bogged your system down so much. They finally fixed that and made it so when you froze a track, it would release the instrument, like Cubase and Nuendo have been doing for years. And so once they made that switch, freezing became an actual useful function. And so you can freeze all your tracks, during a potty break or something, go get a drink or whatever, and then come back, they're frozen, only unfreeze when you need to and refreeze then. You get a lot of mileage out of these computers. You get a lot of mileage out of your old computers that way. And it really doesn't take all that much time. Just the one, because we all work on our certain tracks, get the drums how we want them to sound, and we don't actually work on them for a while until it's like we come back around and are refocusing on them in the mix or something. And so it doesn't really cramp anybody's workflow to just take a minute and freeze some stuff. I think that's a pretty easy solution. So freezing, for instance, if I have this piano part here recorded. Yeah, that's a beautiful piano part that I'm turning sideways to play. So freeze the track. And the thing to keep in mind for freezing is that it does go all the way to the end of your project. So I'm just going to pull this down to make it a little bit faster. And then I hit freeze. And then the next time you push play, it freezes that track. So now I can see it still. But if I want to actually edit something, I have to unfreeze it. Because right now it's loaded off the piano. It added all the effects into this audio file. And even though it looks like a MIDI file, it's reading just a single stereo audio track from the project folder. And so that makes it really easy to do. It didn't take long because that was really short. But you can also do source only. So if you want to leave your effects, and this is super nice because if I have an orchestral thing, and I want to still be able to EQ it and compress it or whatever, then I can just do the source only and not do pre-fader. And then it leaves some of those things on there. So for instance, source only, spacebar, freeze it. Now I can actually still come through, even though it's frozen, and change the EQ and all the other effects and things. So freezing is super cool. Even on big things, it still goes pretty fast with the M1. I believe it's still using just like one of the processing threads. So it's not like that fast, but it's faster than real time for sure. Yeah. Other questions or anything else you want to ask before we wrap this up? Because we've gone past the 30 minutes. Looking over at all the chat for a minute. See if I missed anything. Any other questions? I don't know how long the lag is. I know it's probably about 5 or 10 seconds, but okay, cool. Well, as always, let's see, there was one that just came in. So you can score out, say, your string section, get it all tied up, and just freeze it. Exactly. And I recommend that for EastWest or any of the third-party things right now because you never know when it's not exactly, if it's not 100% compatible, at least the freezing part will keep it without messing things up. Exactly. So give you a space to work on other things in real time. Yep. Okay, cool. So thanks everybody for watching. And I think we're going to do another live stream this weekend. We're expecting not a bunch, but some more snow in Denver. It turns out that everyone else in the country is getting snow, and we're in Colorado having kind of a lame winter. So I hope you're all staying safe and warm in other parts of the world. If you're checking this out from anywhere else, hope you're having a pleasant winter or summer, depending on where you live. But thanks for coming in and checking out the live stream, and come back and check out live streams that we do this weekend or next week. We're going to try to do at least a couple more in the next week or two with some interesting topics. So thanks everybody for watching. Bye.